communication and the systems around it can cure a lot of cultural problems. But it takes time. And a lot of times we as leaders, myself included, we want to hurry up and go. We don't have time for all that nonsense. When you've got an organization that's growing, and that has people kind of scattered about, you have to be intentional about how you're going to communicate the different changes that are going on in the company through processes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and, most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Welcome to Flow Over Fear. I am excited about our show today because we're going to talk about something that is very important to me, and I know to a lot of us, because if you're a leader, one of the realities that we face in leadership is that we are going to face fear, anxiety, and uncertainty for many different reasons. But the organizations that we are running are also subject to that fear, that anxiety, that uncertainty, whether they be companies of 5 people or 50,000 people, nonprofits or any other kind of organization. We all deal with that. And one of the most important ways, one of the most critical ways that we can combat that is through the culture. Enter my guest today. Pam Nemec is a brand culture expert and speaker. Her thought leadership around brand culture via human resources and communications has led to recruiting, retaining, and caring for over 48,000 employees, 48,000 over the course of her 20-year career, in which she worked for a multi-billion-dollar brand that many of you would recognize. She's been widely recognized for blazing a trail in social media, communications, and human resources in ways that are truly innovative, resulting in a high employee engagement, increased retention, and an admired brand culture, which we're all striving for, right? Under her tutelage, her team successfully connected brand sentiment with immense return on investment, successfully engaging hundreds of millions of customers and tens of thousands of employees. She's a true pioneer in her efforts, and her initiatives and insights have been featured in national media outlets such as USA Today, QSR, and Texas Monthly, just to name a few. And today, she speaks for corporations and consults on her method, the 7 steps to constructing a world-class culture. And she brings a refreshing, cutting-edge, and actionable perspective that results in passionate employees who deliver impressive performance. Thank you so much for joining us, Pam. I'm excited to talk to you today. That is quite a resume.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. I'm excited to talk about something I'm extremely passionate about, which is company culture and how it affects us both personally and professionally.
Well, that's amazing because, I know that culture is an important part, and every leader talks about culture and knows its importance. And I believe that every person who's leading an organization knows the weight of it. But I don't feel like everybody really knows what it means, or it's kind of still this ethereal concept. Can you speak to that a bit before we jump in?
Yeah, God, you hit on such an important point, because I think that what most leaders and really everybody out there think is that culture is up to a leader. It's up to 1 or 2 leaders to really establish in your company, and they set the tone. And I don't disagree with that. However, I think that real culture that actually ends up driving performance has to live in the heart of everyone in the organization. And you can have a few good leaders, but when you have an organization as large as, say, 50,000 people, And those people are not contained in a building and potentially spread out in restaurants, like in my case, in my past life. You have to find systems and construct the culture that you want. So if you're the CEO and you say, I want to build a culture of respect, or I want to build a culture of integrity, those are great words, but what you have to figure out is, how am I actually going to make sure that I have put processes and systems into place that people follow, that demonstrate that respect, that demonstrate that integrity, that allow for that, and almost set the expectation for your whole organization that not only is it okay to work with respect and integrity, it's expected, And so I think that people stop short of it. I think I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine was telling me how she left her corporate career and started her own company. And the reason she did was, she said it was she got frustrated because so many times the leaders would stand in front of the room in the meetings, and they would say all the right things, right? They would say that we're going to have a respectful culture, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and they would talk a great game. But she said, but then I would go back to my office and I would work day to day, and nothing that was actually happening in the meeting rooms or in the interactions was consistent with that message. And I think that's where culture starts to break down. You have to commit to actually building the things that are going to give you what you say you want. And that's not easy, right? Mm-hmm. That takes a whole lot of work and a whole lot of commitment. And but what I've seen is that when you do it, and you do it consistently, I mean, you don't give up, and you make sure that everybody understands the expectations around that type of culture, and you build those processes in, people start to begin to let their guard down. They begin to collaborate more. They begin to communicate, and the results just start to occur, because now you have true teamwork within your company, and it's not just a rally cry. It's that's just actually the way you work. And I think that is such a critical part of building a company culture. You can't just talk about it. You have to do something about it. And that's where the leaders do come in. And there's a whole lot of ways to do that, and that's what I speak about. But there's a whole lot of ways to start. There's a whole lot of ways to make that work. But anyway, I think that is an important piece that a lot of folks forget about. Yeah,
I can certainly relate. I mean, I as a CEO myself, it's often, I look at the organization, and it's often hard to, it's hard to walk the talk a lot of times. I mean, and you have to be very deliberate about that. Yes. And I love that you explain that in such a way as to kind of tease it going forward, because I'd like to put a pin in that and dive deeper into it. But I'd like to kind of go back and talk a little bit about how you got to where you're at, and share a little bit of your story, because you have a powerful story. Yeah. You've overcome a lot, and you've risen above a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles that I think a lot of people can relate to. Yeah. So can you kind of share maybe how you grew up, how you got into the career you got into, and yeah.
Yeah, I've had, honestly, I've had a wonderful life in spite of the times I've had challenges. So, not complaining, but it definitely I've had some moments, right, where I needed a minute. But I grew up in a really small town outside of Corpus Christi. It was Portland, Texas. Probably had at the time 12,000 people in it. Everybody knew everybody. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a geologist. I grew up there from kindergarten all the way through my senior year. So literally grew up in a small town, and have four kids in our family, and very close-knit family. So growing up, oddly enough, even though I had all of that great family support, I was kind of bullied. I was very thin. I wasn't very cute. And apparently people wanted to tell me about that all the time. And so that was hard, right? I mean, as a child, you take that stuff to heart, and it starts to affect your self-esteem. But overcame that as I grew up, and I wasn't as thin as I used to be, and all the things. I stopped getting bullied, and I had a lot of friends, and things were fine. But kind of got past that, and then went to college, got married, met a man in college, married him. I was married for about 17 years, and at that point I was working for Whataburger, and started as a marketing manager, and ended up, about that time I was probably a director. We had just relocated our home office from our original hometown of Corpus Christi to San Antonio. I was at that point the group director of communications. So I was helping the organization communicate that change, moving my own family, all the things, and got moved up into the New Braunfels area, and we were living in temporary, like a townhome, while our home was under construction. And then shortly after I had the kids, we all moved in, my husband and I moved in, I found out that my husband was having an affair. And so at that point, I was like, well, this isn't good. I just moved my children away from the home they knew, and now what, right? He ended up moving back to our hometown, my hometown, and my kids and I, of course, stayed here in New Braunfels. But during that time, we had just a whole lot of things going on, a major move, both company-wise and personal. I had a death in my family that was unexpected from an uncle we were really close to. And then about a month after that was when I found out about my now ex-husband. And, I laugh now. I wasn't laughing then. But it was just one thing after another. And, during those moments when you are being just so challenged, it's hard. You kind of want to just throw your hands up and say, man, I give up. I don't deserve all of this, right? What did I do to deserve that? And what I found though is, I kept going, obviously. I focused on my children. I focused on the things that I could control. I focused on my career. I focused on my family. And I ended up leaving. I ended up staying single for another 12 years, mainly because I wanted to focus on my children and my career. And I stayed single for 12 more years. And during that time, I ended up leaving the company as a senior vice president of HR and brand culture. And so I guess what I would encourage anybody who's going through tough times, it's very easy for us to fall victim. It's very easy for us to dwell in the past and say, what did I do that caused this? What could I have done differently to avoid this? Those types of questions. And that's fine to ask yourself that if that helps you from a growth perspective, and it can. But when you dwell there, I find that it's pretty toxic and it doesn't move you forward. And so my advice would be acknowledge that time when you know that you feel like you're such a failure, but know that you still can you have control over your life, and you can flip that script, and you can say, you know what, that disrespect that I experienced, whether it's at work or whether it's at home, whatever it might be, that disrespect I experienced typically says a whole lot more about the other person than it does about you. And so take that, you be strong through it, and say, you know what, I'm going to focus on what's real. I'm going to focus on what matters, who matters. And then when you do that, it just tends to move you forward, and good things begin to happen in your life. And over time, you'll find that all of a sudden you're like, I've never been happier, you know? Yeah. Sometimes, we get pushed in the direction we should have gone maybe before, but we just were too scared to make that big change. And sometimes the universe has to kind of push you that way in order for you to get out of a place that maybe you felt more stuck than you realized. And so I think the perspective on those types of changes is to really see the purpose in it all, kind of learn from it, and just keep moving forward. And get all the, you're gonna have to feel all the emotions, right? The anger, the frustration, the tears will come. All of that stuff happens, but at the end of the day, you can't change that. So it's just like, gotta keep going.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective that you hold now for that, even amidst those challenges, which seem like boom, one after another. You're going through this transition phase. You're moving. You have a death in the family, and
all
then you
in
find
a
out.
period of, by the way, 5 months.
5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
so you're in this new environment. I mean, and then you find out your husband's having an affair, and it's a great perspective to have, as far as knowing now that when you feel like you're falling victim, you can acknowledge it. But at that time, I'm sure it didn't feel that way. I'm sure it was painful, and you didn't, and those feelings, those emotions. How did you gain that perspective? How did you come out of that and get the courage, basically, to say to yourself that you're in control of your life, that you can focus on the things that you can control? Because that's a courageous act. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
I am a talker. And for me, and a doer, I think it's all about action and kind of working through my feelings on things like that. So for me, I said, okay, first I need to get my children into counseling. And myself too. I mean, we all at first went to see a counselor and just talked through what we were going through and all the emotions. And it was interesting because the counselor, I will never forget this, and it was now 13 years ago. By the way, I am remarried. Everything is all good. Kids are good. Life is good now. But we did go to counseling, and the counselor told me, she said, in most cases, people will experience a major change in their life, and it will feel like things are so unstable, almost like, and she drew like the stair step. Mm-hmm. And she said, in most cases, you will experience a change, you will hit that next level of change, and then you have a minute to kind of balance yourself back out again, dust yourself off, and say, okay, I'm ready to go, right? So, and in those cases, it's things like major moves, divorce, and death were the three that she named. Mm-hmm. And she said, in your case and in the lives of your children, you haven't had that level out period. It's like every time you think that was it, the next step falls out. And so you feel like instead of being on a stair step, you're on a slide. Mm-hmm. And so that understanding of, okay, that's what's happening, and that's why I feel so unstable right now, is because one thing after another keeps occurring. And so talking through that with a counselor, but also my sisters. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and my mom. I mean, I used my family. I have to laugh now. I'm like, my poor family. I bet they were like, if I hear this story one more time, right? Okay, I know what happened. But it's like when something bad happens, it's like you have to keep telling that story until you are done telling that story. And it just is cathartic, and it helps you get it out. And I think that was one way, right, to communicate with people I trusted, to really just be able to either laugh, cry, be mad, whatever it was. Having those people that I could speak to was huge. The second thing, though, was I am a person that says, okay, what am I worried about? I try to figure out what is it that has got me most unsettled. And in my case, and in that situation, it was fear for my children. I came from a mom and dad who were married for 53 years until my dad passed away. So long line of marriage, all my grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles. And so this was such a tragedy to me, right? I never thought that would happen. And so for me, my fear was for my children. And what is that going to do to them? And how is this going to affect their life, right? They're not going to get the Leave It to Beaver life that I had, right?
Right.
And so I really turned my attention onto them. And then I said, okay, what do I need to do? And one of the first steps was to speak to my boss at the time, who was the CEO. His name is Preston. He was a great guy and is a great guy. Still stay in touch. And I had to tell him what was happening, which was, very personal, but, he's a friend too. And so I was able to sit down and say, hey, this is everything that is going on right now in my life. And I know that I just got promoted to this new role of group director, which was like a senior director in the company. And I don't want you to think that I'm not going to be focused on my job, but I might not be focused on my job sometimes, right?
Sure.
And because I have to be there for my kids. And he, thankfully, and I'm so grateful for it, was just nothing but supportive. And he wasn't just supportive on that day that I talked to him about it. He was supportive for the next 12 years when I still had to be that single mom. And I joke, I said, if you would have seen me some days, right? I was like basically sweat forming on my lip, got high heel shoes in my hand, running down the hallway because I had to get to my daughter's basketball games or my son's pole vault meets or whatever. And I knew traffic was going to be insane. And so it was just the stress of making sure you are there for your kids. And, I never wanted my children to look up into the stands and not see me.
Right.
I think that's important to kids. And so that was one of my non-negotiables. I wasn't going to miss their stuff, whatever stuff that was, right? So that was just for me. That was important to me. And so I made sure that, I said, I'm going to take my kids to school. I don't want them to have to hitch a ride or be stressed about how they're going to get there. I'm going to do that. It may make me a little late, but that's what I'm going to do. And as far as their games, sometimes I'm going to have to leave a little early. I may have to take a meeting on the phone or whatever. And it was just like having that kind of culture that truly cared about me and what I was dealing with in my life helped me be a better mom and helped me feel fulfilled both at work and at home. And I don't think I would have ever ended up as a senior vice president of this company had they not allowed that. Because when you make your or inadvertently or advertently make your people choose between their children or their family and their work's typically going to lose. They may not lose at first, but over time they're going to lose, right? And so you'll end up losing a pretty good employee over something that really wasn't that big a deal. I mean, if you went back and asked everybody, nobody remembers that I left the meeting 30 minutes early so I could make a basketball game, right?
Yeah, right.
My kids do. And that's the stuff that matters, and understanding that and saying, look, these are my priorities and these are the non-negotiables for me. Mm-hmm. And finding a company culture that understands that and not just doesn't give it just lip service, but really walks the talk, right?
Well, that kind of reiterates what you said at the beginning, which is, that culture was led by the CEO, and it wasn't just saying to you, "Oh yeah, I understand. You need to focus," and then like saying, "No, this project needs to be done this week," and blah blah. No, it's really living that, and so that's a powerful story of how that impacted you as an employee. But there's also a lot in there too of, the challenges just don't just end at that part, because still you're a working mom. You're a single parent. You're running to basketball games. That creates a lot of stress. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that can resonate with that, that are single parents.
Yeah.
How did you find that balance of being able to do all that?
Well, some days I was better at it than others. But I think I just made sure that I was there. And there were other things that didn't get done, like the laundry. The house didn't get cleaned until the weekend. Mm-hmm. I let other things go so that I could do the things that mattered to me. Because I think that when you strive for this perfection, like, oh my goodness, my daughter is a new mom right now, and the pressure on these poor moms to be perfect, and all the things, all the advice, all the do this for your baby, don't do that. I just feel for them, because thankfully I didn't have all of that advice. I just had my mom. But I think that you just striving for perfection as a parent is an unattainable goal. All I tried to do was know that my children, I loved them. I was going to be there for them. They were my priority. But they also, now my daughter's 26, new mom. My son is 22. He's about to graduate from Texas A&M. And now, it's funny, I had a conversation just the other day with my daughter, and I was like, I feel so bad because sometimes I didn't get home and I wasn't able to make you guys dinner. And she goes, Mom, listen. She goes, you say that all the time. She goes, you were such a good mom. She goes, mm-hmm. Who cares? She goes, if you brought home fried chicken, whatever, And I was like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay that I just stopped and got some chicken and brought it home, right? I always had this guilt around not being able to prepare them this beautiful meal like my mom was able to. And you hang on to these things and you feel like you're a bad mom because you didn't do that. And now my kids are older and they're like, what are you talking about? You gave us a great life, and they're very proud of the way I was able to succeed in my career, but also be a good mom to them, right? I'm not the best mom, not the perfect mom by any stretch, but I just think you got to love your kids. You got to show them that they matter to you, mm-hmm. And sometimes that means not doing other things,
I really like that, the idea of not being perfect. And it's a reoccurring theme that's come up in a series of interviews here, mm-hmm. where, we talk about what we're afraid of. And a lot of that is just like not being perfect, not getting that, not being that. And then that reoccurring theme of like what the solution is there is we're giving ourselves grace, the grace to be imperfect. And I love that perspective on balance, because having that perspective gave you the freedom to do both, to be a great parent. Yeah. And to be a great executive. And
I'll say this too. A lot of times I think executives worry that if they give their employees too much grace, too much leeway, they're going to take advantage of them. In my case, that was the furthest thing from the truth. I appreciated it so much. It made me extremely loyal and very hardworking. And so my kids might go to bed, but I would stay up and make sure I got my whatever I needed to get done. Mm-hmm. I was there for the company just like I was there for my kids, because I didn't want to lose that job. I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the culture. I appreciated the family feel of it, and so yeah, it made me work harder, not at all take it for granted, and I saw it not just in me. That's my one story. But out of 50,000 people in the company, and as a person that was in PR, communications, HR, all the things, the stories that I heard of others and the things that the company was doing for others in the same manner was incredible. And when you do those things consistently throughout your organization, the loyalty that is built over time, when people begin to say, they don't just say this, they actually behave this way, they really care. When that happens, it drives performance. Because that culture is now shared beyond the four walls of your company. It's now shared with your clients or your customers or your suppliers or your franchisees or whatever the structure of your organization is. It starts to permeate beyond that one home office, right? Because people say, that's something special, and I want to do that for others. I want to be that kind of leader. I want to do that for my customers or my clients, and I don't want to be the person that's banging my fist on a desk and demanding that you do better. That's not the kind of leader I want to be. And I would say that in 99% of the cases, nobody gets up and says, I want to be the kind of leader that bangs my fist on a desk today, right?
Yeah.
I think when in people's, even in their stressful moments, nobody likes to act in a way that is counter to who they are.
Right.
And so providing a place where you can be your best as a human being, not just as a executive or a performer or a leader, but just as a human being, that feels good to people. And when you can provide that kind of environment and culture, more and more people want to be part of it, and more people want to stay. And more people they start to care about the success of your company. They start to care about your brand's reputation. They start to care about the little things that others just, in an organization that's completely focused on hitting the financials, for example, and they never care about that impact on people, that impact on customers, that impact on the systems of the organization that's going to wreak havoc, or how it's going to be led, how it's going to be communicated. When none of that is considered, and it only matters that you hit that number, you are going to eventually erode that performance, because people will give up on you because they know you don't have their back. And that's my biggest message to leaders, is to say, look, I know I've been at a senior level. I understand all the pressures. I get it. I know that there's a lot that is required of a leader, certainly at a CEO level. But what I would say is, you can achieve all of that, but you can achieve it and more. You can achieve it all, and you can feel so good about the kind of organization you've created if you truly construct it and you build it like you would a strategy to grow your company. You build your strategy to grow your culture, and you construct it very carefully and intentionally. And then you have your performance, and you have something that you're super proud of because of the way you're able to lead, and the way others are able to lead in your organization. And to me, that's true profit, right? Everybody talks about EBITDA and profit and all of this, but redefining profit in your own mind might be a good exercise, right? What's truly profitable?
Yeah.
Right? There's money, but there's other things that are also can be profit to you in your life. And what do you want that to be?
Yeah, that's a great segue into the culture discussion, because when we're, talking about a lot of that, that's the fulfillment aspect. And I know that if a company is fully just focused on financials and the employee doesn't feel that, that they're put first before those financials or that EBITDA, then that fear starts to come into play. And that fear starts to come into play. It's like, then the anger starts to come into play where you're angry and there's misalignment. Yes. So is it fair to say that, with regard to, the people in your organization and building that trust, building that strong culture and the kind of culture where the CEO is giving you the grace to say, hey, I trust you to get your job done, but also take care of your family first.
Yeah.
How is that alignment created?
Well, I'll tell you, some of it is it's very tactical in some cases, So one of the things that I hear from a lot of people is how frustrating it can be. It's not about, first of all, let me back up. It's not about parties, perks, ping pong tables in your break room. A lot of times that used to be what culture kind of represented. That's not what I'm talking about, and I don't think that's what employees are talking about based on the research I've read. Toxic cultures and things that create poor performance in an organization is more about lack of communication, lack of respect as it relates to their working environment. So people want to know when a new product is rolling out. They want to know when a new service is going to be provided. Now, and this seems so simple, right? But it's like, well, of course, say I'm leading a team, and I have a team of, at one point I had a team of 200 people. So I have 200 people on my team. Well, every single group, I had everything from social media to HR, right? I was running kind of communications and HR. So every one of those groups needed something a little different from an information standpoint in order to ensure they were best prepared to support the change. Now, that wasn't easy, right? Because, I have to think about, what do I need to tell the social media team? What do I need to tell my PR team? What do I need to tell payroll? What do I need to tell, the HR services group? Everybody had a piece of that change. And so it would be easier if I just said, we're going to change this. It's happening on December the 5th. And so you guys be ready. Well, what does that exactly mean, right? And so there are processes and systems and even meeting cadences and things that you can put into place. It might be as simple as have a one-on-one meeting with each of the leaders of those different functions so that you have a minute to say, okay, this is what's happening. This is the change that's occurring. And think through how it might impact you, and let's have another conversation about what we need to do to get you ready and get the team ready. And as a leader, I used to tell folks as I have, rising, I guess, in the ranks, my job, I used to do the work. I learned that my job was more about clearing the obstacles so my team could do their job. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that meant running interference with another leader or going and having a conversation to say, hey, this isn't clear. What do we want to do about that? And working that out on behalf of my team. Those are the times where people feel like, okay, she took the time to go and find out for me how I'm supposed to navigate that political weird situation so that it wasn't political and weird. Mm. And then there's times you have to have those conversations that your team can't have, right? Like maybe it's just something that they can't go to the CEO and say, hey, if we do this, it's going to break these 5 things. But sure. I could go and say, hey, it's going to break 5 things. Here's what we're going to do about it. Are you good with that? I just think that communication and the systems around it can cure a lot of cultural problems, because it takes time, and a lot of times we as leaders, myself included, we want to hurry up and go. We don't have time for all that nonsense, right?
Right.
We all need to figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
And I know there's days you feel like that, right? And
Absolutely.
I felt that way too. There's times I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't communicate anymore. I need y'all to just figure it out, right? But I think that what I'm getting at is when you've got an organization that's growing, and that has people kind of scattered about, you have to be intentional about how you're going to communicate the different changes that are going on in the company, through processes like how you can collaborate, how are you going to make decisions, how are you going to communicate it, how are you going to lead it, how is this going to affect your people, how is it going to affect the systems in the company, how is it going to impact customers, and at the very end of all of that, what does that do to the numbers?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not putting finance as like the only consideration. There's a whole lot of other things to think about before you ever think about the numbers.
Right.
You know?
So for a company that hasn't thought about culture yet, really hasn't put that deep of a thought, or hasn't put those systems or communications into place, where do they start? How do you start that process?
Well, I would start here. I would say, one of the things that I also think we forget about is we're not intentional about what it is we want to create. Mm-hmm. So if you are at a place where either you really haven't thought about culture, you're just kind of letting it happen, which is normal, right? Or your culture is happening, but you don't like what you're seeing, I would say go back to my first step in my process is you've got to start creating your own story. What is the culture you want, and what is the story that you need to tell in order to start making it so, right? Bringing it to life. And so going back on that, you start to say, okay, let's talk about the history of the company. Right? Why did you start the company in the first place? Right? What was the purpose when it first began? Who started it? What did those folks care about? What is the story behind the brand that you're now building? And really dig in and understand what is our story. And then from there, you'll start to see, and there's a list of questions, right, that I can provide, but there's you start to understand, like, wow, there's a really special story here. Mm-hmm. We've kind of lost that, maybe you're in an organization, we've kind of lost our way, maybe we haven't really been talking about the founders, so how do we get back to that, and how do we build this on purpose? Like, what is the purpose behind what we do? What is the true impact our organization has on people, on our employees, on customers, on community, on the country, if you're a larger brand? And then when you get there, then you can start to say, okay, now, what is the kind of culture we want to create? Right? Mm-hmm. Now, based on that story, what kind of culture should come out of that? Is it one that is, the founding family or the founding person really cared deeply about the community? Well, then that should become a component of your culture. If the family cared, deeply about and really lived by this idea of respect for all, then that should become a component of your culture. Yeah. And really getting down to, okay, in a few sentences, state what kind of culture do you want to create. And it doesn't need to sound like corporate speak. One of the statements I saw, and I don't know if you've heard about the Savannah Bananas. Have you heard about?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Oh man, it's a minor league.
Oh yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah.
I did some research on them because I kept hearing about them, and I love what they're doing, and they've basically changed their whole approach to baseball. They want to make baseball fun. And so this couple purchased a stadium that was pretty much, it sounded like it was pretty run down and dilapidated, and everyone might have thought they were crazy because other people had come along and said, we're just going to tear it down and start over. And they were like, no, it's a really big part of the community. So they salvaged this stadium. And then they bring in this team, and they decide to name the team, and they do a contest, and everyone is really not supportive at this point. But they get the few fans they have, and they name the team the Savannah Bananas. And everybody's like, the Savannah Bananas, and giving them a hard time about that. But what they did is said, we want a culture of fun. So they now have this, they're wildly popular. People love going to their games. Their ticket prices include all concessions. They have a mascot that's a banana, obviously, and his name is Split, which is fun. They have a group of dancing women aged over 65 that dance at every game, and they're called I think they're the Savannah Nanas. It's like everything is like just built around this idea of fun. And so what happens is now people are lined up to experience what they have created. And if you go to their website, their statement says this, but it says it in a way that is fun, right? So it's like you've got to unearth your own personality as a company and a brand, and stop trying to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like, really, who are you? And make that real and authentic so that people can say, hey, you know what? I want to be part of that. And some people will say, you know what? I don't want to be part of that. And that is okay too.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think, to that end, with regard to that, I think there's a lot of fear around that from a leadership position to even take that step because, whether they like it or not, they've created a culture. And if they haven't paid attention to it, well, now you have people in here that aren't aligned with whatever vision you have. There's misalignment. There's all these things. And by making a bold statement, whether it be fun or, serious or whatever the culture represents, by making a bold statement, you're going to alienate people, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a fear in that from a leadership standpoint and from an employee standpoint. Ultimately, I mean, it feels like even though that's the right direction, that's a fear that maybe leaders have. Yeah. How do we get beyond that? And how do we face that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And because I think that a lot of times too, people think when you talk about culture, they immediately think diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's not the only thing about culture, right? Culture is all about how you behave on a day-to-day basis, how you work with one another. What kind of environment are you creating that people have to basically live in, right? So I don't want people to think it's just DEI. That's just one piece of it, right? I think people equate that, and that is potentially causing some fear because you can do it wrong. And I think in that case, people do need to seek out the advice of DEI experts that really live in that space. But what I'm talking about is the culture. I'm talking about the place, what it's going to be like to work at your company, and giving that promise to your employees to say, this is what we strive to. And I used to have leaders that would be concerned too, like they would say, well, I don't want to say that because we're not going to always do that. I mean, like, what if we have a bad day, or what if we can't do that? I'm like, that's okay, you guys. It's an aspirational statement. Okay, you're setting a stake in the sand to say, this is where I want to be, and you say that to your team. You say, you guys, we're not going to be this every day. There may be days we fall down, but this is the aspiration. This is where we want to go. This is who we want to be. But you be vulnerable a little bit, and you say, but I need your help, right? And in order to really make this come to life, it has to be part of what you do too. I don't think it's up to just the CEO, and I think everybody thinks that. And I'm like, no, it isn't. The CEO can only do so much, and even their leadership team under them can only do so much. You have to put it as part of the whole ecosystem of your company so that everyone feels responsible for living out this environment, this culture, this collaboration, this teamwork, this environment that you want in your company. It has to be in the hands of everyone. And in order to do that, you can set the statement, but then you shortly after that, you start constructing it. And it doesn't have to be overnight, okay, I'm going to put it in everything, right? But maybe you say, okay, I have it now. I know who I want to be. I know what I want to encourage our company to become. So I'm going to set up a communication team. And in that communication team, we're going to set up the platforms. We're going to identify the audiences. We're going to understand the sources of all the information that our people need. And we're going to commit to communicating better in our organization. Mm-hmm. That alone helps your culture. You know, just having a structure and having a reliable communication system that everybody can count on, that's a commitment to culture, right?
Nice. Yeah.
And you can also take that same thing and say, okay, I need to incorporate culture into how I recruit, how I interview and hire, how I orient people to the company. Those types of things is like putting that into the culture, into those systems. Now it becomes not just what the CEO said at a meeting, it becomes the way you operate. It's an operational model that you form over time that is almost, it's you can't penetrate it, right? It's just the way it is. And and it's hard to explain. I've seen it and I've done it, so I know it works. And I think that why leaders are always kind of fearful of it is because they are just saying it, but they don't have any way of actually ensuring it occurs. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is you can ensure it occurs, but by putting it in the ecosystem of your organization, and also setting the expectation right from the beginning to say, this is the kind of culture that the leadership team and all of us that we've surveyed have agreed that we want to create in our organization. So this is what we've all agreed to. Now let's get started.
Yeah. So communicate and systematize.
Yes.
Yeah.
Communicate and then systematize how you're going to actually bring it to life. And people will get excited about that. And then you're going to have people come to you and say, well, I think we should do this. And I think we should do that. And they're going to be very excited. And there may be ideas that you say, not right now, but thank you, but just not right now. We'll do that, but maybe some other point. It's okay to say no.
Yeah.
As long as it's respectful, you know?
Sure.
And so I think that leaders have to be okay with making a promise, understanding that you're going to fail some days, and then just continuously working against that over time. It really does work, but you have to be willing to stick with it. You know,
yeah.
it's like you know, anything that you strive to do. Like say you were part of the Iron Man.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Did I mention that? I don't know if I've talked about that.
I read about you.
Okay.
So, you know, when you said, okay, I want to be part of that, I'm sure there were days that you didn't feel like getting up and working out and doing all the things you had to do to prepare, but you did it because you knew that the ultimate goal was to be part of the Iron Man. So same thing is in culture. If you know your ultimate goal is to create a certain type of culture and a certain type of environment and to gain a certain type of performance, which you will far exceed anything you'll ever do about pounding on the desk with your fist about numbers, then it's worth it. It's worth those early mornings, those late nights, that those hard conversations. It's worth it because you know that once you get there, it will be amazing. And that's, I guess, the way you have to look at it. It's just like, no, some days it's not going to be something you feel like is the priority. but you've got to make it a priority because it is that important to your performance of your organization.
Yeah, well, it's culture is such a big topic, and such a big topic to fit into, under an hour. But you are the expert, Pam, on this, and I'm so grateful. You really are.
Maybe one of them. There's plenty out there, but yes, I appreciate that.
Sure, but yeah, I mean, you are absolutely an authority on this because you've done it at a large scale, and with an organization in the tens of thousands of people, and I run an organization with over 100 people, and that's so it's not nearly that big, but still challenging. I know a lot of people have those challenges, and so I know your passion brought you out of the corporate world and into consulting and speaking on this subject. So what's next for you? What are you working through now to move that message forward?
Yeah. So when I left after 20 years, I was ready to move on and try my hand at something a little new, but really a passion of mine. And that was to say, I had been part of a really special organization, and I had been fortunate we weren't perfect either. Like I said, there's going to be days you're just not at your best, but we did pretty darn good, and our performance was awesome. And so I thought, if I could help other organizations, other women, other men, other leaders understand that there's another way to get the performance that you're after. And I just felt very strongly about doing that. And so I've got a website that has all this information on it, but I do workshops just to kind of get people started and really just to get in there and help them build out. Like, okay, let's talk about your history. Let's talk about what kind of culture you want to create. And let's really define that. Okay, now let's talk about how we're going to start constructing it. Let's talk about the principles that all of your leadership team is going to live by. Let's work through those things together because it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? There's a model that I use to kind of guide people through these different steps, but I know that every single company is different. Every single company has different challenges and that they're facing, and so I try to listen and really understand where you're at, and understand okay, now I kind of see where your struggle is. So let's start with step 5. You've already done step 1 and 2. We need to jump over here to communication, and I think that's where you need to be. Let's set that up. Let's help set that up for you. So these workshops kind of help people get started in that. Or I can just come and speak to your organization just about culture and the importance of it and how it drives performance. And so in both of those areas. And then, if executives just need some coaching, virtually or otherwise, I do that as well. Just to kind of keep people moving forward, right? Because to your point, you put the stake in the sand and you're like, okay, now I said it, Pam. What now?
Right.
What? What do I do now? I can help with that because we've done that, and I've written the statements, I've built the systems, I've helped with the processes, I've had the conversations, I've had the PR, because I ran PR. So there's when the things come up in the general public and you have to respond to that, all of that is culture, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not just your how you're treating your employees. It's also how you're treating your customers, your community. Everything plays into your brand and into your culture. And I just think that having that perspective of how that can eventually build your brand and build your performance makes the hard work very important to me, and I think it should be very important to other leaders, because I'm not talking about ping pong tables and parties. That's another piece of it, but that's not going to get you where you need to be.
Yeah, I think probably the most
Exactly.
culturally driven organizations probably do not have ping pong tables.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so and that's hugely valuable because the work that you're doing is hugely valuable because culture really defines who we are, and there's a lot of fear in that. And I think that if any of you listening are leaders and you're experiencing that fear within your organization, you're afraid, and you're feeling that on a frequent basis, or your employees are afraid, whether you have 2 or 200,000 employees. The culture is vastly important, and the better that you can define that, the better you can get a handle on fear and rise above it and learn to dance with it better as an organization. We don't just feel it individually, we feel it as groups. And the best way to do that, the best way to start, is to articulate our values, to articulate what our culture is. Pam is a huge resource at that, a wonderful resource at that, and has experienced it, has gone through it, and as you've heard today, has risen above a lot of challenges to achieve what she's achieved. Pam, where can people find you?
Well, I'm on all the usual places, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, have the website, pamnemec.com. Yeah, any of those places, you can reach out to me.
Excellent. Well, reach out to her and look for her, connect with her. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today, Pam, and thank you to the audience for joining us on this episode. I hope you got a lot of value from it. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you liked this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.